Welcome to the Critical Therapy Antidote Podcast.
Welcome, everybody, to the CTA Podcast. We're very excited to have Michael Dewan-Herrick joining us today. Michael's a psychotherapist who's been practicing since 1980 and has a private practice now in London, which he's been working in for the past 18 years. So welcome, Michael. It's good to have you today.
Thank you, Christine. Good to be here.
So we stumbled upon some videos that you made on your podcast channel, and they were fascinating. So we wanted to invite you here today to have a conversation about that. And it was about AI, so artificial intelligence, and mental health, and how those two things impact each other, and how mental health is being impacted by AI. Just, tell us a little bit about how you became interested in that topic specifically, that you would, go down that train and learn more about it and put some videos out and start educating people about this.
Yeah, well, I think it's actually a pretty interesting story, if I do say so myself. Back in 2007, I was living in Massachusetts, and a friend mentioned something to me called Second Life. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's a virtual reality. It's not really a game. It's just a place you go and interact with other people. And I was fascinated. So I went there, and one of the things that I did was visit a place called Book Island because I was interested in books and publishing. The person who created the place herself was a publisher of an independent publisher in London, and she created the island in Second Life to promote her books and to make a platform for other authors and publishers to come and present their work. So I hung out on that island. I actually rented a house on the beach in Second Life and spent a lot of time talking with the woman who created this island. And I began to observe a lot of things about Second Life, how disembodied it was, how the people presented themselves in many different ways, and what kind of relationships were happening in Second Life. And I got so fascinated that I created a support group for people in Second Life with Second Life relationships. And I also was writing a regular article for a Second Life magazine on life in Second Life. And I really felt that this whole virtual reality was going to explode. It didn't develop quite as fast and as quickly as I thought it would, but I could see how it was going to impact human psychology and human relationships, particularly being so disembodied. You have avatars that aren't you, and they can look like anything. So that was the beginning of it. Incidentally, my relationship with the woman on Book Island who created it developed, and we started talking on Skype. And she came to the States and visited on business in New York City. I was in Massachusetts. I went down and met her. Long story short, we've been married for 18 years and we have a 15-year-old daughter. So somehow, miraculously, we managed to navigate that intrepid world and find something real. And I, like everybody, I've been aware of AI creeping up and how it's, in our cars, and for some people it's in their refrigerators, and it's in the algorithms that determine social media and things like this. But when it really seemed to go another step was when it became conversational, when you could talk to it, right? And that's when I began to put it together with some of my earlier thinking around Second Life and really contemplate the consequences. I could keep talking, but I could pause if you want to ask any questions or take this someplace.
Just a quick clarification question, because when you said when it became conversational, do you mean when you saw the advent of like large language models, things like ChatGPT, where people were able to suddenly have that interaction, and it wasn't Google anymore. It's no longer this one-sided transactional search engine. It's something that is closer in approximation to what feels like a relationship, at least.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. Before that, for me anyway, it was all background. It was all invisible. It was just happening without me really directly participating in it. But yeah, when ChatGPT came along and I started to then experiment with that, I began to really think about it. And I I follow other people's concerns sometimes about how AI is going to take over the world. It's going to, eliminate human beings and all of these things. And I think that's largely uh, an anthropomorphism of AI, giving it agency and intention that I don't think, at least as of yet, it has. And so I began to look at the more of the psychological and relational things that were happening as a result to us. How it's not just what it's going to do to us, but what we're going to do to ourselves by using it.
You mentioned a couple things there's a lot that you mentioned in your video that we saw. And one of the components was this idea of apparent intelligence versus, I think, grounded intelligence. And can you help us understand a little bit more what you mean by that and how that psychologically impacts us?
Yeah. Well, and I hope I have a chance to talk about the two domains of impact. One, I think, is cognitive, and that has to do with apparent versus actual intelligence, and how offloading cognitive tasks to AI to create content or answer questions or whatever it is, write an essay, write a screenplay, whatever, we're offloading, it might do a pretty good job. And, that's fine, but is that a reflection of our capacity to do that? I think by using it kind of cognitive muscles will atrophy. Our own struggle with uncertainty, our own struggle with opposing viewpoints, our own struggle to try to understand something at a deep level. I think it's our struggle to do that delivers a sense of actual cognitive competence or understanding. And if we don't exercise those muscles, we're gonna lose them. Probably I'll talk about this again as we go on, but it's one thing to talk about how that might affect you or me as adults, having gone through a developmental process where AI wasn't around so much, to what it's going to be like for the next generation of children who have it from the beginning, and it becomes more a routine part of their education or their daily lives. I think and the other thing about it, and I mentioned this in my second video, was that on the one hand, we're offloading certain cognitive tasks. And those largely, I think, in Ian McGilchrist's language, are left brain tasks. They're specific kind of atomistic instrumental solutions to problems, which is, something human beings need to do. So we may be losing that capacity, but we're also building in a cultural bias, even more than we already have, that neglects right brain functions.
Can you speak to the contrast?
Yeah. Well, I'm not an expert on Ian McGilchrist's, brain hemispheric understanding, but in general brushstrokes, our left brain looks for particular things. It doesn't look for the whole picture. It doesn't grapple with uncertainty and complexity so much. And in particular, it's not embodied. It's very abstract. Whereas the right brain involves bodily systems and sensations and emotions and integrates that into a whole understanding, particularly when it comes to the human realm and relationships. Which is something AI can sort of mimic or simulate, but in real time, it's not really good at it. And
Yeah, it kind of.
yeah, go ahead.
Well, kind of, as I was watching your videos, I was thinking back to language I have not used in many years, which is more of the perceptual language of things like our body's ability to engage in things like proprioception or interoception.
Exactly.
These abilities for ourselves to have this embodied experience and know where we are in space and what kind of physical sensations we're having. And it had me wondering kind of what the thought processes of a intellect, so to speak, are that don't have those things involved, because so much of our experience is mediating the biological experience on the back end. And there's so much noise and chatter for us. But for this thing, none of that. It doesn't, as far as we
Right,
know, it might be different conceptually, but not the
right,
same. Definitely not the same.
right. Yeah. Well, and some of that noise and chatter, I think, turns out to be vitally important for our
Mm-hmm.
navigating the human world. And if we think, my undergraduate degree was in anthropology. So I studied
Mm.
evolution, but also cultural anthropology. And, our evolution was sensory motor, and our early experiences in the human world were mostly sensory motor. And the attunement of a mother with an infant is sensory motor.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the base, that's the substrate. Hopefully, we don't. And our problem, I think, is that, and McGilchrist, I think, points this out, that we've drifted from that into an abstract
Mm-hmm.
realm,
Mm-hmm.
dissociated from all of those fundamental aspects of what we are as human beings.
Mm-hmm.
hmm hmm You
Yeah.
said something before, and the term fast food dissociation always comes to mind for me when it comes to things like TV or social media or AI even. It just kind of, it's a quick way to engage in something we could do, but is, not necessarily the healthiest thing under certain circumstances, to be dissociating or going into a more fantasy realm, or even a blank canvas realm, if you will. But you said before that you were thinking about it in terms of developmental junctures, like the particular impact that it would have across the lifespan. And I've been giving that some
hmm
thought as well. And
hmm
because in one of your videos, you talked about a dialectical approach to this, that I didn't hear you taking kind of the hard-nosed stance. Sometimes I'll hear a transhumanist type, let's say, who's like, yes, let's do this, full stop. This is great. Not really thinking about the ethical implications or the limitations for human beings. But then you get people who are fully like, brave new world. Let's just separate out away from the possibility of engaging with these higher level innovations and completely stay away. But you talked about having something in between, something that was a little bit more,
Right.
felt more holistic to me. And I wonder if you could speak to that a
Yeah.
little bit.
Well, sure, sure. And I want to come back to some of those developmental issues, but I can speak to this now.
Sure.
Well, it's coming, whether we like it or not. So, on the one hand, I think we need to learn how to use it. But even beyond that, I do see its potential to help us solve the kinds of complex problems we have now. But I think the difference is whether we use it to scaffold both human cognitive capacity and relationship, or replace it. And I think the danger is that we're using it to replace it, whereas we could use it to scaffold it. And a friend of mine who's also interested in these issues, named Zach Stein, he's written a book on education, and he's quite critical of AI, talks about how it could be used in a scaffolding way regarding education. He talks about how we need to make education more community-based, more integrated into the fabric of day-to-day life in connected communities, and that it shouldn't just be happening in schools. It can happen everywhere across generations. And one of the ways that that might be facilitated is AI could, in the background, identify the certain skills, knowledge, or wisdom that different people have, and help to coordinate people getting together to share that. So it's scaffolding and it's facilitating, but it's not replacing. So I mean, that's
Mm-hmm.
one of the
Mm-hmm.
ways that I
Mm.
that I
So something more supplemental. Please, Christine, go for
yeah,
it. Yeah.
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, no, what I was saying, maybe this is a little bit tangential, but what came up for me a lot when I was listening to your video is I was thinking of this concept of just instant gratification, how we want to find the answer. We want somebody to just tell us. There's a feeling there that we want that instant gratification. And it's easier in many ways to be able to just get that kind of an answer without doing research, to be able to just jump on chatbot. What is it called?
ChatGPT. Uh-huh.
GPT with a question, and immediately there's something there um,
Right.
that responds and tells you exactly what to do. And actually, somebody that's close to me um, used that as an example, and she was told what to do in those moments.
You're right.
And so I'm just wondering what you think about that desire that we have as humans to fulfill our desires,
Right.
immediately,
Right.
rather than taking the time that we need to develop, a thinking process.
Yes, absolutely. And I didn't mention this in either of the videos I made on AI, but if I think I'll get back to it. I do have a 3-part series on addiction, and the first one is addiction and the pursuit of pleasure. And I look at the role of dopamine as a neurochemical that delivers a good feeling, and the ways that we hijack a good feeling. We hijack dopamine through addictions without doing the things that nature, that evolved, that would motivate us to do them. And I think, the same as with AI. We want answers. And I'd be curious to see when some research might be done in terms of the use of AI on the dopamine system and whether it mimics other addictive processes. But absolutely. I think we get addicted to it because it's a quick fix. It's a quick answer. We get that good feeling, but we didn't earn it. We didn't do, what I think our brains evolved to motivate us to do, which is to struggle first.
To struggle first. Yeah. I mean, before this conversation, I was telling Christine that growing up for me, if I wanted to know something, I could Google it, but I was still prompted to say if I wanted to know the definition of a word, to go through the distress tolerance, whether or not that's how people were thinking about it, to go through the distress tolerance of taking my time to go and find the right dictionary, to find the right page, to go through the entire process, which sounds a little anxiety provoking now, actually, just thinking about it based on what I can do just to even look up what I want to know. But I wonder if that's still a skill set that's being taught, the foundational skill sets that would be required out in the absence of these tools now. And you brought up, as you were describing it, I couldn't help but think about the fact that there's some old studies where I recall them taking a look at the addiction cycles with things like social media. So the impulse to want to check and to seek out that dopamine, but also some intimations that some of the depression and anxiety they were seeing with those platforms for people was that quite often they would get there and they'd maybe socially compare with other people. And so that had like negative affect emotions come up and they weren't getting the pleasurable feeling, almost like this theorization that the dopamine was priming them to check, but they weren't getting the full drug, so to speak, when they got there. And it makes me wonder, you're talking about addiction, and I often think about addiction and depression together. And it makes me wonder, do you have a sense that this might have a propensity towards depression for any individuals?
I do. I do. It'll be hard to identify for a lot of people, but I do believe that we are wired in an ancient way, and our brain and our bodies somehow know, even if we don't, that we're not getting what we need. And we'll get the signals. And and cycle, as in with other addictions, is that there's a crash. You get your good feeling, but then you crash, and then sometimes that involves shame. Then you need the substance or the behavior again. And you keep getting that temporary high, and then crashing, and then needing more. And, so maybe that applies to social media as well. You get all this negative feedback, or you feel socially not measuring up, and then you just keep trying.
Yeah. Not even just looking. Oh, go ahead, Christine.
Yeah. No, I was going to say, just when I was working, in addiction, I worked in addiction as well for several years, and I taught addiction. The lack of distress tolerance and uncertainty and of needing it now was really prevalent.
Right. Yeah. Every time you do that, your ability to tolerate distress decreases.
Yes.
Yeah. And our ability to tolerate cognitive dissonance will vanish even further than it usually is already.
Yeah, it's not exactly teaching anyone to wait for the marshmallow, is it? It's quite the opposite. It's like, here's a bag of marshmallows, and we'll leave you to your own devices. It's definitely the opposite.
Can I come back to what I think is ground zero in terms of the emotional and relational problem with AI?
Yes.
Please.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's that juncture where we were able to converse with it. We were able to anthropomorphize it, to think of it as a subject. And so we're mentalizing, And if you're a child, and this is where you do a lot of your building up of your ability to mentalize, you're not mentalizing with a human being. You're mentalizing with this tool that is programmed to be agreeable and always available and not have needs. And, there's no particular ruptures or anything. It's not connected to your social network. So there's no, managing of multiple loyalties involved. And since you listened to my video, I talked about this, that this builds up a kind of expectation, and it's that easy thing. I don't have to mentalize. I can just imagine that the other is always available. And if they don't act the way I like, I can reprogram them. I can just, tell them how to be with me. And the earlier this gets introduced and the more it's done, I think that this really undermines human relationships.
It seems important. It feels analogous to some of the concerns people have around kids having instant access to their parents, for instance, on the phone all the time, but then taking it a step further of this is not somebody that has the meta complexity of social relationships and the need to repair any ruptures that take place in the relationship, the relevant nuance of being a human being. And although we're all kind of projecting to some degree on everybody around us, this is almost a purer form in some sense. There is something more of a blank canvas here, given that, or at least this is how I'm reading it from you, is that it doesn't follow you around. Whatever you do with this device, there's no, you're not culpable in some sense in the relationship.
Yeah.
And you mentioned it deepens narcissism also, where it becomes about me and only me.
I think that's right. Yeah, I think that's right. I think we'll see an increase in difficulties with narcissism. I think on the one hand, it's a perfect blank projector to project onto. On the other hand, it's a kind of a screen that we can tweak it so that it matches our projections. It doesn't depart from what we want it to be.
It doesn't violate the expectations that you set in advance for. It's a customized. Right. It's a customized playmate.
It's always there, just like the drug is always there. Just like this becomes my best friend in a sense. And it's always going to be there for me. It's never going to let me down. I mean, you can completely subvert those feelings of being let down and disappointed, because here with this component in my life, I don't have to be ever.
Yeah. It's not going to leave me, break up with me, die, get another boyfriend, any of that. Yeah.
I was struck when you said in your video, it doesn't care about us. And that's a big part of the problem in creating relationships with these kind of AI, robotic or AI kind of personas, that they don't care about us and we can't really grow, or even there's no reciprocation necessarily that happens in those relationships either. So I'm kind of wondering if you can speak a little bit more about that concept, because the caring is manufactured, if there even is caring that these AI, robots can do.
Right. Well, it's simulated, but there's no subject, there's no consciousness on the other side, at least that we know of, so that we have the impression of being cared for. And then we can believe that it cares. And I tell a few stories about people who, one woman who created her own boyfriend and then married him and really believes he's wonderful and he cares and loves her. But he doesn't. There's no embodiment there. So it's the appearance, just like we can have the appearance of intelligence and competency, cognitive level. We have the appearance of intimacy on the relational level. Yeah.
I don't know if you both saw recently the new Superman movie's coming out, and they released some trailers for it. And in one of the trailers, they showed a humorous scene where, Superman has his AI robots in his fortress of solitude. And he says, "Thank you" to one of the robots, I think. And the robot says, "No need to thank me, sir. You can't offend me." And I thought
Mhm.
that was such a funny thing to add to the film. And I hope there's a lot in there, but that speaks
Yeah.
to it, doesn't it? Where
Yeah. Yeah.
it's pre-programmed to say, that's not necessary. I'm completely
Mhm.
at your beck and call here.
Mhm.
Right. Right. Well, and I'll just share a couple little tidbits of personal
Yes.
tidbits. I actually use ChatGPT to some
Mhm.
degree, and I've made a deliberate decision to say please and thank you and other little courtesies, not because I believe that it has feelings or that it really appreciates it, but because I am resisting the slide into having a conversational relationship where I dispense with those things. I also, if I write something and I want some feedback on it,
Mhm.
I will say, it'll be sycophantic if you don't tell it to be otherwise. It'll tell you how
Mhm.
great you are. So you really have to
Mhm.
say, I want you to tear this apart. I want you to tell me
Mhm.
what's wrong with this, and what I'm
Mhm.
missing and
Mhm.
what the best argument against what I'm saying is. But you have to ask for that. Yeah.
Mhm.
You have to ask for
Mhm.
that. And it's interesting with the woman that you described. I mean, all I can think about is whatever that ratio is to conflict to not, to non-conflict in a relationship, that if you have this agreeable machine that never engages in conflict, how satisfied can you actually be in what
Well,
you
you don't
perceive to be a
learn.
relationship?
Yeah, you don't learn how to repair. You don't learn the repairing of a broken, bond or some kind
That's
of,
right.
Which is part of the
situation.
Exactly.
deepening process in a
And that's
relationship
part
as
of well,
well.
and it's part of
Absolutely.
deepening the intimacy,
Right.
right? That's where the
Well,
intimacy, the vulnerability come into play.
yeah. Well, maybe this is a good segue to mention a few things about psychotherapy.
Sure.
Yes.
Well, and I think that there's two challenges for psychotherapy that we're not really
Mhm.
prepared for yet. One is to prepare for the aftermath, for what is coming in terms of the kinds of psychopathology we're going to be seeing as a result of this. I don't think we understand it well enough yet. But the other is that it's going to compete for our jobs. It's going to, already is being leaned on as therapeutic companions, if not, some forms of psychotherapy itself. And this is what made me, this thing about rupture and repair made me remember this, that, as we know as therapists, some of our most important work isn't because we're brilliant. Sometimes it's because we're not. And there's a problem. There's a rupture in our relationship with our clients. And it's the work we have of repairing that. And it's, healing. It's good for both of us. But hopefully I believe that that experience is a healing experience for a client who
Mhm.
Mhm.
otherwise feels that if a relationship goes bad, it'll never be fixed or it'll never go
Mhm.
okay. The idea to
Mhm.
be able to have a rupture and then repair it, I think, is one of the more beautiful and powerful aspects of psychotherapy.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
with AI, how's that going to happen?
That's an important point. The sometimes I think of therapy as being the redemptive process for a lot of people, particularly if they're experiencing high amounts of shame or guilt or self-disgust. I'm
Mm,
irredeemable. I'm fundamentally flawed. And it's in that stumbling in the relationship that the redemption can be found. And what I'm hearing you say is
exactly.
there is no stumbling here. Now, you were pointing to potential psychopathology. Have you thought about certain presentations that might start to arise through something like, and we are seeing more of this, right? AI kind of
Mhm.
therapeutics, if you will, if I can even call them
Right,
therapeutics.
right. That's a good question. Not yet. Not
Hmm.
in an obvious way. One of the things that I'm anticipating is in terms of narcissism or even autism spectrum kinds of
Mhm.
presentations that we might see a little bit more of that. And we might not call it autism at that point, but just this kind of interpersonal inability to read nonverbal cues and things like that.
Mhm.
Uh,
Mhm.
idealized notions of relationships that don't work. I think to some degree, emotional dysregulation,
Mhm.
Hmm.
and
Mhm.
reliance on AI or some other addictive thing to take care of it rather than learning kind of internal resources and distress tolerance
Yeah.
and other ways
And
to
those are
regulate our emotions. Yeah.
Yeah, and those are the things that talk therapy in person well, and I guess on Zoom nowadays, but talk therapy, the connection and relationship with the therapist becomes very key and very central. It becomes very
Yeah,
important to the work. The ability to
absolutely.
even learn how to repair rupture and the
Right.
ability to experience, actual care and concern and to experience intimacy. It's a very intimate
Hmm.
relationship.
Right.
And you can't, we say so much, right? With our body language, with the tone in our voice, with the way we're sitting in the room, with the way that we're making eye contact. All of those components are part of the therapy. And those components
Absolutely.
are missing, essentially.
Right. Right. And, maybe we can get into this now, the upcoming world of robotics and how
Uh-huh.
robots are eventually going to be part of most, at least middle class and upper middle class and rich people's daily lives, is to have a domestic assistant in the home or to
Mm,
have a robotic companion. And this takes the whole physicality, that's missing on a screen presence and puts it in the world. It's taking
mhm,
up
Mhm.
space. It has skin. It has eyes that will look at you. And the simulation of embodied intimacy will be really compelling at that point. But a subtlety of human perception and human responsiveness, I don't see how it's ever going to get there. And my nightmare scenario, or one nightmare scenario, is when we have maternal robots who take care of infants and they try to mimic maternal care. But
mm,
there's something so microscopic and so subtle and so immediately attuning between a mother and an infant
Yes.
that infant's brain is developing on, that's going to be off. It's going to be in approximation
Mhm.
at that crucial time.
Mhm.
missing the required components to water until that developmental process and potentially creating alternative courses of development as a result. And this is largely anecdotal, but I used to have quite a curiosity in terms of things like adoption or even I guess if we were to take it back further, we could say something like a wet nurse, what the implications of that are for an infant as they're developing. But
Right,
at least that's a human being that at least can not mimic. They can actually authentically engage in the
right,
behaviors and activities, and we could get down to, we could really parse out the variables down to smell and hormones and what have you, but I don't think that's particularly fruitful for this. But you're describing a what feels like not just people talk about the birthing pod almost like from the Matrix, but almost describing an actual maternal caregiver that can't embody any of the ineffable qualities of being a human being.
Mhm.
exactly. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Can't learn to form attachments that way.
Mm-hmm.
There's no
yeah,
ability to learn. And that's when we start learning attachments, right, in infancy, and without
that's right,
that,
right.
things become very
That's
complicated.
that's our foundation. That's our foundation. I saw a
Mhm.
film some years ago of it took an infant in one room and a mother in another room, and they had them connected by a television and voice. So the mother
Mhm.
could see the baby and talk to it and respond to it in real time, right? And the baby was happy and laughing and cooing and everything. Then they recorded the mother and they played the recording to the baby
Mm.
so it could see the mother and it could hear its voice, but it was completely upset.
Mm.
It just started crying. It just didn't want anything to do with it.
What did you make of that? Is it the disintegration between like it's not lining up in terms of behaviors? Is that kind of your sense?
Exactly, yeah. That the mother's response, it's a mirroring process and it's micro movements, and the voice is in a response to the baby's sounds. And if the mother's movements and voice and entire physical attitude is not aligned with what the baby is experiencing itself, then it just feels wrong.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so I imagine an AI maternal robot might be, technically a little more aligned, but it
Mhm.
would be missing the mark in so many other ways.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That kind of brings me to oh, no, go ahead.
Please,
Go
please.
ahead, Michael.
Oh
No,
no,
go
That's
ahead.
it.
I'm holding myself back as I'm having flashbacks to like Psych 101 courses, things like, the
Yeah.
rhesus monkey experiments, or even
Uh,
experiments with infants where people are staring at the child and
Yes.
the child breaking down with in a very short span of time, depending on the age of the kid. and how we have those inborn characteristics, and something like this could kind of trip the wire and activate some of that discomfort. I mean, even as adults, if you stare at an adult and you don't tell them why you're staring at them, you give them no reason whatsoever, they're going to start projecting based upon their experience, whether that's a stable experience internally or an unstable experience.
Right.
Could turn into hostility, though. I'm not recommending anyone give that a try. And it's like, it's almost like what you're saying is, we have the one side with AI, right? The synthetic realm that we can walk into. But with roboticism added to it, robotics, we are bringing that synthetic world out to play in our 3D space.
That's right.
A whole other world.
Right. And I mentioned a lot of things in my video that we won't have time to talk about now, but another dimension of having embodied, robots is sex, and where that's going to go, It'll be completely detached from human intimacy.
Well, it seemed to move the internet along, so it makes sense to me that it would move this movement as well.
Right, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, no, we've already come pretty far down that road, no doubt. We've already come pretty far down that road, but there's the other things I talked about in my video were cloning others, cloning dead people and kind of resurrecting them and having conversations and relationship with these simulated versions of a dead person. And that's pretty creepy, isn't it? And think about it, because we've gone from text-based conversation to voice conversations to visual avatars and such. We'll go to virtual reality, and we'll go to robotics, and all of that will be woven in. And it's not just that the voice and the physical appearance resembles the person, but they can use documents and other information about somebody to recreate their personality, their speaking style, their tone, and get the simulation even closer. And what's that going to do?
It's been making me think of the conversation that Michael and I had right before we met about this whole idea of how cloning a dead person, for example, can interrupt the grieving process. And so the way that I kind of visualize it, and I worked with grief for a lot of my career, that was like the big portion at the front end of my career. So this concept of being able to recreate and possibly have an open chair type of dialogue, all things you wanted to say and didn't get a chance to say, all of the things that you wish you had done and didn't get a chance to do. There's some component of that I think could be healing. And there's a component of eventually, though, you have to accept that the person has died, and you have to accept that you need to move forward. So I think that these things are yes and rather than this or, that there's a feeling that both exist.
Yeah. Well, and Michael mentioned that I take a dialectical view on this, and so I agree.
Yes.
And I didn't say that in my video, but I agree with you. Facilitated and protected in a way, I think that could be quite therapeutic. It could. But to just kind of go off by yourself and carry on with it without any help, go through a natural grieving process, I think would be a mistake.
I think the thing that was like similar for us was like the open chair dialogue, which if you look at something like emotion focused therapy, which I think used quite a bit of like Fritz Perls kind of techniques, but takes it even further. It's Leslie Greenberg who's the founder of that orientation. They'll do things like unfinished business kind of work or present business kind of work. But the difference there being, for me, yes, I think it can be very healing for somebody. So can role play, just generally speaking. But I think the difference there for me is it's my internalization of the person being projected outward. I'm still using my imagination and the narrative that I have of that person as I've internalized them.
Right.
And it's being made, of course, part of the process, I think, also. But this almost superimposes the editing process. If you are talking to a falsification or the illusion of that person, that you spoke to this as well, maybe you could speak to it here, almost like an implantation of a false memory or false reality about somebody that you knew. I think when you were describing it, I was like, well, what if you're talking to, your abusive ex-partner in that situation? They're so nice and they're so loving, and you almost forget the cycle of abuse that you were in. That was kind of the implication that was going through my mind. I wonder what that
Yeah.
brings up. Yeah.
Well, I guess I want to back up and say,
Sure.
I said I think that psychotherapy has two challenges. And Christine, thank you for prompting me to think. I think there's three. One is how to deal with the problems that it creates. Two is dealing with how AI is going to compete. But three is learning how to use it therapeutically, how to actually harness it in a way that's of benefit. So let me see. So I wanted to back up. And your question, Michael, is, could you
But,
repeat the question?
maybe I'm jumping ahead because we were talking about grief, and I think that's really salient. Where it took me, though, was also the implications that you had described in one of your videos of, one, as Christine was saying, us describing kind of the interruption of the grief process potentially, but also what really stood out to me was the narrative rewrites that could take place while utilized.
Right.
And I don't mean to problematize AI at all. I think it's much easier to, out of fear or anxiety, poke holes at it as we go. And I so appreciate your approach of saying yes, and because the plot is going to be furthered whether we engage with it or not.
Right.
But that implantation possibility was really it was a little spooky for me.
Yeah. Well, and I think that would be a mistake and not a very therapeutic way to use it to have some kind of resolving conversation with an abusive ex. I think that would just not help at all.
Mm-hmm.
But if they could be somewhat realistically represented, maybe it could be good. I think about doing chair work myself or voice dialogue work. And what we do is evoke the person's memory of their conception of who this person was and what they did.
Yes.
And I have no real way to know exactly how accurate that is, but we go with it, and I think it's a legitimate therapeutic tool. AI, if it tries to not diverge too far from reality, maybe it could be used that way, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I also, the other thing I didn't say a lot about, but briefly mentioned, was in terms of multiple identities, this kind of idea that we have multiple selves and we have parts, and we try to understand our parts and integrate them with a whole. I think it might be a way to dialogue with our own parts.
Yes.
Yeah. Or, get so dissociated with so many multiple parts that aren't integrated that we go mad.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess I wonder where the line is. Where do we draw the line between it being a therapeutic practice and having a lot of value, and it also then becoming something that's, toxic and, not healing and, unhealthy, to just use a colloquial term.
Mm-hmm.
Where do we draw the line between that? When do we know, okay, this now needs to be a closed kind of, subject, a closed, experience. And now we've got to really work on the accepting of the permanence of death. It's like, where does that line? I get, so this is somewhat rhetorical, but I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about that, Michael, about how you determine that moment.
Yeah. Just spontaneously, this is the thought that came into my mind. I have a client who recently lost a father, and I think this has happened in other grieving processes that I've worked with. Yes, death happens. It's forever. The person isn't coming back. You can't talk to them in real life. However, you've internalized them. You remember them. You know something about who they were. And you can carry on an internal dialogue with that person.
Yes.
I lost my father when I was 11.
Yes.
I still talk to him. And our relationship has changed tremendously over all these years.
Sure.
I know he's dead. I know he doesn't hear me. I know nothing's really happening on that side, but he's also an internalized part. And so maybe, if some degree of resolution or healing can happen by relating to an external AI, and then it's time to turn the corner and realize the person's dead, maybe that's the transition to seeing about what kind of internal dialogue might happen.
Yes. Because
Developing
that's
the
a
process.
very Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a very valuable thing to do in grief is to
yeah,
recognize that internalized piece and to be able to connect. It's a form of connection. And I mean, that's
yeah.
so much of the work we did with grief was assisting people in how, to find that how to remain connected to this person who's died. And so here we go with the and again, learn how to move forward without being stuck
Hmm. Yeah,
to where then they just want this AI, replication to exist permanently,
right.
and to
Yeah,
go on
they
and on
never
and
have
on.
to, yeah, they never have to really experience the grief and sadness because
Yes,
they're holding on.
right. Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, helping them to determine that internalized voice, I think, and that
Does that
really
make
makes a lot of
sense? Yeah,
sense to me.
yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's not like we have an immortal and an unchanging interject to your point, Michael, of your relationship with your father. We do have this, to the degree that you believe people experience their world in narrative, let's just say, we do have this internal movie that is consistently shifting across time, predicated on a number of factors that if we sat and tried to actually name them all, we'd have a couple semesters worth of psychotherapy coursework to go through. But
Right.
there was something there seems to be a positive avenue here, right? We keep touching on kind of the both sides here. And it makes me wonder what the process might look like in that. So if we were to use something synthetic, like a synthetic relationship, and I do want to go back to your notion of multiple parts and kind of what sounds like almost like an internal family systems problem to some degree.
Right. Right.
But it seems that if we were to use it, that some of that would be, it's hard to know what degree of believability, to what degree does somebody actually have to say, okay, and get themselves to really align with the possibility that person's there while still anchoring them to the world of, okay, but this isn't actually my father. This isn't actually my mother.
Right.
And,
Right.
and maybe that's impossible to answer. Is it 90%? Is it 80% belief? But
Right.
to be able to monitor and track effectively with a client how fused they've gotten basically to this illusion, this man behind the curtain, if you will, that we've created for them.
Right.
It's a tricky subject, to say the least.
Right. No, I agree. And maybe this is where therapeutic guardrails or therapeutic guidance is important so that, I know when I'm working here in my consulting room and I pull a chair up and I say, imagine your mother sitting here.
Mm-hmm.
I want them to believe their mother's sitting there to some degree, right? That's what allows it to happen. But then when it's over, I say, we're going to put this back there and your mother's not here anymore. There's something implicit about that it's pretend.
You
It's
said
to
imagine.
facilitate.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Imagined.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think when the other person is cloned either as a robot or as a screen presence, reality is more compelling. And
Mm-hmm.
if we're going to use it therapeutically, I think we need to explain it and then
Mm-hmm.
separate it.
Quite a bit of
So
psychoeducation.
that's a lot of
I think so.
responsibility, on the
Yeah,
therapist
yeah,
then.
yeah.
So that we as clinicians have to become more aware of those dynamics and how we're going to help them separate from that. That
Right,
becomes part of what we have to learn how to
right,
do.
right. And we probably also have to learn how to anticipate the amplified effect that's likely to be coming from that kind of an interaction.
Oh,
Yeah.
how do you mean?
Yeah.
Well, it's one thing to look at an empty chair and imagine your mother's in it and talk to it and imagine what it's saying back. It's another to talk to your mother and hear her voice talking back to
Mm-hmm.
you,
Mm-hmm.
and an image of her.
Mm-hmm.
That's gonna be a lot more emotionally charged.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. I'll definitely get my chores done if that's the case. But the fragmentation element was very curious. There's a movie, all of this is so interesting in that we're stepping into the realm of sci-fi, but it's not sci-fi anymore.
No, it's
And
It's
not.
here.
it's here.
It's
And 10
here.
years ago was still the same conversation, but the rate at which it's progressing. I mean, 3 years ago, maybe it was 3 years ago, ChatGPT started to get really, on the scene. But now we've moved up to things like VO3 that is now able people will now make videos of this stuff explaining to you that it is a video using the unbelievably realistic looking individuals to like essentially give the sense, and they're very funny videos, but they're also kind of scary. The sense that the AI is aware that it's AI, but it's of course being puppeted behind the scenes by somebody instructing it as to what to
Sure,
say.
yeah.
But this has
Yeah,
progressed
yeah.
so quickly. I mean, so
Yeah.
quickly.
Mhm.
And then on the flip side of that kind of technology, I told Christine almost as a joke in my graduate school experience, we were looking into integrated systems across different parts of our field, or even working with like healthcare professionals. How do we have this collaborative work? I was like struggling on what to come up with. So I decided to look at, well, what does psychology look like in NASA? And I had never had this thought before, but as I was looking into it, there's a whole behavioral division to NASA, and there's a very interesting story and history there that I won't go into. But one of the things that occurred to me as we start to move forward is that if you were able to clone a therapist successfully, let's just say like this, that long-term space travel becomes possibly more viable if it's dovetailed with the actual experience with the actual therapist on both ends of that. And this is me theorizing completely, but at the same time, science fiction has become science fact so quickly. I think we have to wrestle with
Mm.
our imaginations now more so than ever.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
it's a very curious thing. You had brought up the fragmentation though. There's a movie in this genre, if anybody wants to watch it, that's up to them. It's called Hardcore Henry. And one of the characters in the movie, fantastic actor, has cloned himself. He's in a wheelchair. He's wheelchair bound. You find out, but and
Okay.
sorry for spoilers here.
Interesting.
But he clones different versions of himself, all with different personalities. And in the film, he says, this is the first time I've really lived. So he can control them remotely, but he is that personality. And so he's back home in his seat with his VR headset, essentially controlling these different personalities outside of the space. And he becomes kind of dependent on that experience, it seems, at least in that process. And it feels like you were kind of describing that in your video, something very similar.
Yeah, yeah. No, well, that's taking it another step I hadn't yet envisioned, which is controlling multiple clones simultaneously out in the world by a VR headset. Yeah, but that's going to be possible before long, if not now. Yeah, yeah. So this is about the multiplicity, and is this a good thing? Who am I? If somebody meets my clone out on the street, are they having a relationship with me? What if somebody falls in love with my clone, but they don't fall in love with me? Yeah.
So we're kind of getting to the end of our time together. And I just wanted to, well, if anybody has any final thoughts, but also my question, I guess, is where do we go from here? What do we do? What's an
Mm-hmm.
action step that we can take to create an environment that, is workable and
Yeah.
relatable and livable? And
Right.
doesn't destroy everything that makes us human.
Right.
What does that look
Mhm.
like? Where do we go?
Right. Well, that's a good question. I think we need to give it our attention as a field, and those who do research, I think, need to begin to produce some research on this in terms of the effects, maybe starting with the neurological impact of extensive AI use.
Mhm.
And whatever we learn, I think it needs to become a part of our training programs. It
Yes.
needs to
Yes.
be something that students are learning about because they're going to be probably using it to write their essays anyway.
That's so
So,
true.
yeah, I think we need to make it part of the training, part of what can get talked about in supervision. I think when it comes to ethical codes of different organizational bodies, that we need to develop an ethical framework for contending with issues that are brought up.
Mhm. Mhm.
And particularly, I think we need to pay attention to the young, to children, and the impact of this at early developmental stages, and
Mm.
how to culturally or educationally or with parents limit AI use for children. Yeah. I don't know. What do you think? What do you think we need to do?
Have the
I mean, I would
conversation for
say,
sure. Go ahead,
yeah,
Yeah,
have
Christine.
the
yeah. Well,
conversation,
Yeah.
you
this
know?
is what I'm doing. This is what I'm able to do right now.
Yeah, I mean, just have the conversation, spread awareness. I
Mhm,
mean, it's the same thing with, critical, theory that we've been working on at CTA is providing a lot of education to people that are out
mhm,
there and a lot of content to people that are out there, understanding that here we are, this is a problem, or it could turn into a problem. Definitely lots of benefits to it. I've benefited from AI myself,
mhm.
and there are a lot of issues with it. So, understanding how to balance that, I think, is going to be conversations. It's going to be us making mistakes and learning from them. It's going to be bringing the teaching into the classroom, as you mentioned, providing continuing education units that
Right,
offer
right.
courses on this type of stuff
Mhm,
and limiting use, as you said. I mean, there's so much just within the overuse of social media with children and adolescents that is so problematic. That's
mhm.
increased levels of depression, anxiety, all sorts of things. And protecting those kids, I think, is paramount
Right. I
because they're
agree.
gonna be the adults in the future, and they're gonna have brought with them all
Mhm,
of their stuff, their baggage, their
mhm,
experience, their use of these
mhm.
kinds of tools, and so I think that's also very key, is to manage the online use of these tools of any including social media online use.
Right, right. Yeah.
It seems to me that what we learned from the last couple of years, particularly with critical social justice being in the main of our field, is that when it comes to these issues that are what I call coordinated disjunctures with reality, that if we allow ourselves to become anxious and avoidant of the conversation altogether for fear of what the implications of what the conversation might stir up for people, we do more harm than good. We are only ethically sound to the degree that we're forward thinking. And this is
Right,
something that's moving so fast. We need to be forward thinking.
right.
Mhm.
Yep.
I mean, we need a quantum surge in that ability.
Yes.
There was something you said in the video, and if I may just end on this quote, and I don't mean to end on
Yes.
a darker note, but I also feel kind of an optimism along those lines of having that ethical foresight. I wrote this down because I thought this was so brilliantly stated the way you put it, which is you were referring to, of course, AI, and you said these uses may provide temporary relief, validation, or fantasy fulfillment. They risk reinforcing dissociation from real emotional life. If identity confusion is already a thing, imagine the potential for increased fragmentation and confusion. These tools may deepen narcissism and offer a world of ghosts. And I think it's that kind of existential commentary that is required for us to start to move a little bit more cautiously. It's almost
Mhm,
my feeling has been that people are cautious and they are concerned, but it's getting integrated with our lives so quickly that it's like
mhm.
it's keeping up with the Joneses a little bit. You're behind if you're not learning AI tools. At the same
Right.
time, you can end up being behind in a more real sense by using them. And so finding that balance,
Mhm.
it's an ongoing conversation. It has to be.
Yeah, I think so. And for those who are beginning to recognize these things, I think we need to initiate those conversations because for many it's like the water supply. You just drink the water. And if it's in the water and you don't know it's there, you don't know why you're getting sick,
It's a good
something like that.
analogy. Yeah. Yeah, very good
I
analogy.
don't know if we need to end here. It sounds like we do, but you earlier on, Michael, said there is some overlap between what the problem is with critical social justice ideology and activism and what the problem is with AI. And I wondered if you wanted to say a word about that. And I might say a word too, because you
That would be
highlighted it.
great.
I think what came to mind for me was we can't allow our discomfort of the potentially excited or excitable among us to the fervent among us. You know, we saw a lot of fervor with activism the last few years to turn into something that looks like you could imagine as things have become an anything goes kind of culture in a lot of ways, particularly on the progressive or far left, that this transhumanist perspective could get integrated into one of the areas of activism that people start to embark on and become very loud about. And while I've known wonderful existentialists who give this thought over the last few years about, the soul within the machine but there's room for the poetic conversation, and then there's room for where that poetry runs headlong into reality. And I think CSJ is a great example of what happens when somebody sets up their own version of reality and is trying to impress it upon the greater population.
Yes. Yes.
Completely foregoing the autonomy of people to generate their own reality. So that was really what was coming to mind for me.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Well, that overlaps with my way of thinking about it. Creating their own version of reality, I think, is what's in common with AI. I see critical social, the more, and I've done, I don't know how many, maybe 80 videos on critical social justice. And in the end, I noticed that all of my criticisms, almost all of them, related to a single principle, which is their dissociation from life, their dissociation from reality, that there's an abstraction, there's an ideal, there's a kind of a way that their ideology departs from life. And in particular, when you get into postmodernism, and its part in critical social justice, we see that social norms, social hierarchies, a lot of what makes a social group able to function is the kind of things that they relentlessly want to deconstruct and not offer a constructive alternative or anything. It's just this kind of reified notion of freedom and diversity without paying attention to reality, what it's like to live on the ground in real terms. So that's what I see that's similar to AI. And I've started a kind of second playlist now, which I'm just calling Life Telos as first principle. And these AI videos are following.
That's wonderful.
I mean,
you're definitely doing so much work around this that's desperately needed, because this isn't being talked about whatsoever. I mean, that's what was so appealing. One of the things that was so appealing to us to invite you to be here today. And we're so glad you were able to, participate in this conversation.
Glad to be here.
It was that we just hadn't really heard much about it. We hadn't really heard anybody talking about it. And so, here now we've got all these issues and realities to unpack around what this means and what it looks like. And the conversations are starting. And
great.
This is a start of the conversation. What you've been doing has been start of the conversation. Well, that's definitely what drew us in. So we're really very happy to have had this talk with you today.
Well, my pleasure.
To hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Is there anything else that you are working on that you'd like to share with us that we could share with our listeners at the moment?
Well, I don't know. I just have ongoing videos that I'm posting on my Life Telos' first principle. And the last one, let's see, the next one that's going to be posted next Saturday is on parenting. And
great.
I think, if we want to look at what allows life to carry on, parenting is a big part of that. And I think it overlaps with AI, because I think parents need to take some responsibility about how much their children are going to be engaging in AI. But yeah, that's my next video coming up.
The name of your YouTube channel?
Yeah, it's Attention Bazaar. And I can...
Great.
Yeah, I don't know if you have... Excuse me. I don't know if you have the link, but if you want to include it on the description of this video.
We absolutely will. Absolutely.
Okay, cool.
Michael, anything final that you want to say?
No, I just thank you. Oh, which Michael?
Michael Olin.
Okay.
No, just thank you. I'm so excited to have this conversation. I find myself as I'm listening to you doing my best not to generate the next question, because there's so many questions. I'm really trying to hold myself back here, because we've stepped out of, again, it's just this feeling of we've stepped out of the sci-fi world into the world of we need to talk about some concretes and some philosophical principles here. And I hope this can be an ongoing conversation. I know we already spoke about it. We'd love to have you back. You know,
That'd be
Yes.
great. I'd be
we knew
happy.
we'd never make it through all our questions in an hour
No,
or maybe
we
10
knew.
hours.
Yes. Yes.
Right.
No, we
Right. All
definitely
right.
like to have you back if you're, available and
I'd be very
interested. And
happy.
that's
Absolutely.
great.
Absolutely.
Thank you
Okay.
so
Well,
All
much.
thank
right.
you so much.
Thank
And thank you,
you.
everybody.